Let's talk about heroin. Um, so you write Afghanistan, after 8 years of U.S. occupation, was now producing 9 times more heroin than the rest of the world combined. And of course, that bled over into the Afghan population. The Afghan National Army was filled with addicts, as you write. Um, um, but then the alliance between, in essence, these narco traffickers in the Northern Alliance and everywhere else essentially drew in members of these special forces. Explain how that happened.
So Afghanistan under U.S. occupation produced more heroin than the entire world could absorb. And the truth around this phenomenon, I think, is one of the best kept secrets of the 21st century. And the lack of awareness in the general population among Americans is really astonishing. But it's not a surprise. Their ignorance has been procured by the mass media and the government, which is hiding this sort of crime of the century, as I sometimes think about it. The the 2000s and the 2010s were a time of a global heroin crisis around the world. In the United States, as it's recent memory, people are well aware that we had a terrible heroin crisis in this country. It became nearly the leading cause of death among adults. And then, of course, morphed and transformed into the fentanyl epidemic, which is with us today and has never been worse than it is right now. Well, the cause of that heroin crisis was down to the war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan caused the heroin crisis globally. In Europe, in Russia, in Australia, in Asia, and also in Canada and in the United States. All these countries that have, they're either first world or have a large market for drug users, were inundated with highly potent and very, very cheap heroin from Afghanistan during this time. And it's just supply and demand. When there's that much of it, it becomes a lot cheaper. In the United States, people whose opiate addiction have been primed by loose prescribing practices around prescription pills found that they could buy heroin for a lot cheaper than they could get, let's say, some Percocet pills that have been diverted from the illicit drug market. And the dirty secret that no one in government or media bothered to tell us all these years was that the people in Afghanistan that were producing those drugs, they were people on the U.S. payroll. They were narco warlords that were directly armed, sponsored, and protected by the CIA and the special forces. And that complicity went all the way up to the top of the corrupt Afghan client state, Hamid Karzai and his family in particular. They were definitely implicated in it, and many other named warlords. I have their names in the book, and the sources that I cite to demonstrate for a fact that this government, this client government in Afghanistan, was effectively, the biggest drug cartel in world history. And the fact that the United States, the whole of the United States government was complicit in this is really mind-boggling to contemplate, and not enough people are aware of it, in my opinion.
So let's talk about how these special forces operators use the skills that they have learned and become drug dealers. You profile, I think his name is Huff, former state trooper, um, and then maybe Los Zetas. I mean, so you train, these people are highly trained, and they take those skills into the drug market. Talk about that process. I mean, the amount of heroin that was coming into the Fort Bragg area, there was a small airport near Fort Bragg that you write about, was kind of staggering. I mean, just massive amounts. And much of it was funneled through not just former members of special forces units, but active members of special forces units.
hmm Yeah, that airport, the Rayford Drop Zone, or the PK Air Park, it's sometimes called, that's a privately owned business. And if I told a lie about them being involved in that institution, that facility being involved in international drug trafficking, they could turn around and sue me for defamation really quickly. But the facts are clear. The facts are nailed down. There are criminal prosecutions that have either taken place or that have been fully adjudicated, show that that airport, which is where Delta Force does its parachute training, has been a hub of international drug trafficking since the 1980s. and involving current or former Special Forces soldiers trafficking drugs into the United States by air and landing them and offloading them in this airport that's within Fort Bragg's airspace and is contiguous with the base, and has been a center of Delta Force training for decades. Most recently, the manager of that airport, a guy named Tim Thacker, whose father, Gene Thacker, was an OG Green Beret who was the sort of the pioneer of this illicit enterprise. Tim Thacker, the son, was convicted relatively recently of methamphetamine trafficking and was said by North Carolina prosecutors to have been the biggest meth trafficker in that state's history. That's just one story I tell about systemic drug trafficking taking place in the Special Forces, around Fort Bragg. And to answer your question or to elaborate a little bit more, I think it often has to do with that need for stimulation that I talked about. Sometimes these guys aren't necessarily doing it for money. Like you said, they have a certain skill set, this irregular warfare skill set, this attitude, this mindset of doing things secretly and getting away with it. That's something that tends to port over relatively easily to the drug trade. And Billy Levine, in his memoir that he wrote that I obtained after my book was published, he talks about specifically this, about how as he started to get into the drug game and started meeting higher level drug traffickers, they were very interested in his background and understood that his skill set was something very valuable to him. And he became an advisor to the cartel, helping them do things like understand police surveillance. Because, of course, as a Delta Force operator, he understood these things very, very well, what the capabilities and limitations were of surveillance, how it works, and how to evade it. And also, he was helping them traffic drugs by air from Central America into the United States, including through the use of cargo, like dropping drug cargo with a parachute from a plane, either without a person or accompanied by a parachute jumper. I mean, this is the tactic that has been used at the airport and in this community since the 1980s. They will fly drugs in from overseas and they will jump out with it and into some of the national forests around North Carolina or Tennessee or Georgia, and maybe come back for it later or what have you. But that's the game that they're playing at Fort Bragg. It's been going on for a long time, and whenever it comes to light, it tends to get passed over or actively covered up by the military command.